Red Ray Gun Limited presents
The Benji and Nick Show. Hello.
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 Good day, morning.
Good
That sounds
afternoon.
like bad editing. Good Gibbons. Good Gibbons.
Good cup of
Gravy.
tea. Goodness.
Good Loch Ness.
You just throws that curveball. Been ages I've had a Loch Ness. Curse you and your...
Well, I think you just walk into it, don't you?
I walk into it, but you know...
If you walk into Loch Ness, you get very... Anyway, listen. It's the Benji and Nick Show. I'm not Benji.
And I'm not Nick. But we both do something very similar. We both talk about cult telly, don't we?
We do, yes.
All these old shows that we love, shows which people might have forgotten, shows that people do remember but perhaps just don't ever think about, and other shows that you think about far too much and wish that you'd forgotten.
With the little raffia attachment.
The confusion as to where things really are. I put there. Only just by a father about 7 o'clock, tea time.
Yes, so there are three kinds of Benji and Nick show, aren't there? There's the kind where we read out your emails.
There is.
And there's the kind where we talk about...
hang gliding.
the latest stuff we've been watching. Actually, those two usually go together. There's another kind where we do a commentary, usually at the moment, of Doctor Who, Death to the Daleks or Revenge of the Cybermen. And then there's the one that we started with, the style of Benji and Nick show we started with, and which we're doing today, which is that we set ourselves the task last week, because the podcast comes out every Sunday, of watching a particular thing that we then talk about this week. And what did we set ourselves to the task of watching last week?
Well, it's been a long time coming. It's been one of those ones where we've thought, we should probably get round to that at some point. And this was indeed the week. We have gone for Blake's 7. Fantastic BBC science fiction programme from the 70s.
When in the 70s?
Well, somewhere between 1970 and 1979. I can find out for you.
Towards the end, I'm thinking.
It is towards 1978 to 1981.
One.
You see.
Well, there we are. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. We decided to watch the first episode, but I have to tell you, dear listener, that we enjoyed it so much we watched the second episode as well.
We did.
The first episode is called The Way Back. What's the second episode called?
Let me find out. Hold on.
Is it called Stuck on a Ship?
Spacefall.
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 I don't know why it's called that. The Way Back, I suppose it's called that because the central concept of Blake 7 is that, and it's a really interesting way to start a story, is that this character Blake had been a hero who had rebelled against the oppressive regime of the Federation. But they had caught him, put him on trial, drugged him up, made him confess, then erased his memory. And this is when people come and try and revive him, as it were. And it's an interesting way in, isn't it? So it's the way back to where he was, I suppose.
Back to who he originally was, Back to before he was completely brainwashed. Very clever way of thinking, and because... As well as that, you know, the whole episode, the second episode, is spent in space, isn't it? On its way to Cygnus Alpha, the prison planet.
Yes, in the prison ship London.
Yes, in the starship Fish Cakes. I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Neither do I. But we had a great old time watching that, didn't we? We thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, it was quite different for us because normally we watch them separately, but you just happened to be over at my place, and because we were going to Big Finish Day the next day. We were driving up with the stock in a van, and so we watched it after having had a lovely dinner in a restaurant, and we just sat there with a cup of tea. And
enjoyed
watched a bit of Blake 7. I was recommended by Big Finish's head of marketing, Steve Berry, to watch more than the first episode. He said, come on, Avon doesn't turn up, or Avon, as Gareth Thomas called him, not Avon. Avon. Batman. Cyberman.
Batman,
yes,
Spider-Man.
so we thought we'd have to see an episode that had Avon in, because Avon ended up being the main character, really, after Gareth Thomas left. Did he leave at the end of the second series, or was it
I think
the
he
first?
did. Yeah, I think it was the end of the second series. Yeah. Yes.
That's always the problem, isn't it, when you name a series after a particular character and the actor doesn't want to do it anymore. Doctor Who's got, longevity built in because they've decided they can change the actor and keep the character, but that didn't happen with Blake's 7. So you had Blake's 7, which quite often wasn't 7, and and another actor in the lead.
Of course, I always found it amusing because Avon was always against the idea of being these crusaders, yeah, and then of course he ends up actually taking over, which is quite interesting.
Well, as John Ainsworth said when he was John Ainsworth, the producer of the Big Finish audio at Blake 7, John, when he was speaking very movingly about the recent death of the brilliant Paul Darrow, he was saying that Paul Darrow used to say to David Maloney, the producer of Blake 7, the trouble is, Avon's so unpleasant, he wouldn't do this, he wouldn't help this person. And then David Maloney would say, yeah, but if you don't do that, we don't have a series. So
true.
You've got to do the thing that contradicts your character. And that was the thing, really, that after Blake had gone, that we were sort of mostly focused on a bad guy who was helping reluctantly, which is one of the first series to do anything like that, and it was just by total accident. But back to what we're supposed to be talking about. What are the main things that strike you about the first episode, Benji?
Well, the first episode, I always love it because it's slightly different to everything else anyway. It's just more of a standalone thing. But the concept itself is fantastic, and it's brilliantly handled, with Blake being sort of slowly realising that he isn't leading this sort of simple, easy life, and then actually his entire existence has been fabricated. And there are some pretty sobering moments in there, aren't there, really? I mean, one of the biggest ones, of course, is Blake being accused, he's been set up, of child molestation, or,
yes,
which he says, with children, in his sort of massively booming voice. But it's pretty heavy and dark stuff. It was a very dark first episode with massacres and all sorts. And
explosions on bodies and things.
And I think it's, you're hard pushed not to be kind of sucked into it because it's so compelling and so different. And then when we both sat there, we were really into it, weren't we?
We were enough to carry on, really. We thought we'd barely get through the first one, to be honest. But no, we absolutely loved it. It does feel like a play for today, which is sort of an old BBC strand where they might have like a bit of science fiction every now and again, which would be quite dry. The interesting thing is that even though really in many respects, in terms of its style, production style, Blake 7 is like Son of Doctor Who, because it's science fiction done in that BBC video multi-camera way, it feels much more stark than Doctor Who at this point. And the music by Dudley Simpson, who was Doctor Who's regular composer at the time, it doesn't come in until after the massacre, really, when Blake realises he's in trouble. Up until then, it's very stark, and I don't think there's any music, and suddenly in it comes, and it becomes, that's when there are hints of it being like Doctor Who, because so many of the cues we felt, the music cues, were very similar to particular sorts of music that Dudley Simpson was doing at that time for Doctor Who.
I think retrospectively, if I was in charge, I probably would have gone with somebody else to do the sound. Not because I dislike Dudley, because he's incredible, but purely because I think having that firm line between Doctor Who and Blake 7, I think, is quite important, because they're both very different things. And I think, and it does kind of, it blurs that boundary a little bit, maybe, and it does. Keeps it the same. I think it would have. Yeah, it could have been very different. But, over lunch today, I watched the third episode, Cygnus Alpha. And there's music all through that, all the way through, all going on all the time.
Is it very Doctor Who-ish?
Yeah, it feels very Doctor Who-ish. It's all about, the primitives on the planet have their own cult led by Brian Blessed, and it's all fabricated. But it's all like this.
Here's my cult.
And and he's doing great, but it looks very much like a Doctor Who. It's very, Sisterhood of Khan sort of vibes.
From Brain of Morbius.
But there's a great thing. I mean, this was the BBC's sort of excuse to do a Star Trek, really, isn't it?
Or attempt. I mean, what Terry Nation did, and he said this publicly, is that he sort of created it as a negative image of Star Trek, because in Star Trek the Federation is nice and everyone's nice, whereas he made the Federation the bad guys. So
we're following the criminals.
Yeah, exactly. And of course the whole business about what a criminal or a freedom fighter or a terrorist is, some people would argue is just a question of who writes up history, I mean, this is a band not just compiled of freedom fighters, but just petty criminals, isn't it, as well? Yeah. Who sort of become freedom fighters. Well, this is it. I mean, I dare say that the Nazi German occupying force in France saw the French resistance as terrorists. Yeah. Whereas we talk of them being freedom fighters. So whether someone's a terrorist or not is entirely dependent upon your point of view. If you're the person being blown up by the freedom fighter, you don't think of them as freedom fighters, you think of them as terrorists. And everyone, or sections of the world population and society have different ideas about that. But anyway, this series puts us very much on the side of the freedom fighters stroke terrorists. Although there's an interesting thing, isn't there, because Blake is very moralistic, isn't he, and he gets mocked for that by Avon. Yeah, Blake is sort of not what you'd expect from what you would coin the phrase like a freedom fighter, but he's very moralistic, he's very sensible, always does the right thing, doesn't he? He's not one to rock the boat, whereas Avon and Jenna, for example, they've got those edges to them in which are slightly, they're real criminals. Certainly Avon, you get the feeling he's a bit of a git, really, isn't he? Well, he says that the only thing that's important in life is getting power and money, doesn't he? Well, there was a great thing in episode 3 where he says he finds a bunch of jewels inside the Liberator and says Blake's down on the planet trying to get back all the criminals. And he turns to Jenna Stannis and says, well, this is our chance. We can go now and we'll have enough money here that we could buy a planet. That we will be richer than our wildest dreams. And he was willing to sacrifice Blake, and it's only because Jenna eventually forces his hand that he actually lets Blake come back. So I believe he would have gone off. There's a point, isn't there, in the second episode where they've taken over the prison ship, but the nasty man who was in Face of Evil, who also fancies inappropriately touching or whatever Jenna, doesn't he? Leslie Schofield, yeah. Yeah, he has the rest of the prisoners at gunpoint, and he basically says to Blake, if you don't come out and release the main computer of the ship, I'm going to shoot these people one by one, and amply demonstrates it enough for Blake to give in, which of course Avon doesn't want to do, does he? He's prepared to let them die. But there's a point where Avon asks Jenna something about, and I can't remember the actual quote, I don't know whether you can, where he says, do you believe in him? Do you want to follow him? Do you believe in that sort of thing? She said no, but I want to. You know what I mean? So she's sort of halfway between the two. She's not an idealist. She doesn't believe in all that nonsense, but she'd love to believe in it. And if someone can show her that it can work, then she's willing to go along with it. And that's what makes it so compelling, I think, is that the mixture of different characters that eventually form the team as we know them throughout the series. They are all vastly different characters, all motivated by different things. And that's what I think makes it such fascinating viewing. And I think they're all strong performances. That's the key thing about Blake Seven's success, isn't it? And no one really lets the side down with the main characters. But before we go back to the main characters, and by the time you get to the end of the second episode, not all of them have arrived in the series, because Callie hasn't yet arrived, has she? I just wanted to go back to the point we made when we were watching them about the acting in the 2 episodes we watched for this podcast. Yeah. There's quite a contrast, isn't there?
It certainly is. Well, one of the things we're saying is Michael E. Bryant, who directs the first one, and straight away our old mate from Revenge of the Cybermen, Kelvin, turns up, doesn't he?
Yes.
In that one. But
another bad guy. We thought it was very surprising that he seemed to be a good guy, and I thought he can't be a good guy.
But it is. We noticed very quickly, didn't we, between the first episode's cast. Not necessarily a bad bunch, but not quite giving it I suppose not quite judging the situation and being as serious as the situation kind of called for.
Yeah, the performances weren't as... Let's put it this way. The performances of some of the supporting characters in part 1, the way back, were not as effective. The second episode had far more effective performances, especially the captain of the London.
Yeah, the captain and the crew, to be honest, they were all very... They were a convincing bunch, and you could see that they could tell a story without... you could see that they were visibly tired. They didn't really like doing what they were doing, but they did it anyway. And there was a real degree of believability in what they were doing. I mean, we worked that out within the first 2 minutes. We looked at each other, didn't we? And sort of were like, oh, this is different. This is completely different.
It was better. And I hate saying that because I like Michael E. Bryant's work, but it wasn't as well done as the second episode. Is a much better episode because it just feels, in terms of characters, more real, doesn't it? I think there was a lot of generalised sci-fi acting in the first one that didn't seem to...
Especially given that the first episode is such a high stakes episode, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of the content, Blake's up there being charged against all kinds of hideous things. He's slowly remembering who he is again and things like that. That's pretty hardcore, and they're all trying to cover it up. But everybody's a little bit wishy-washy, aren't they? There's nobody that's quite on the nose serious. Whereas you've got... Okay, so in the second episode, you've got Raker, who is, one of those characters. He has no redeeming qualities, but he does play...
That's that chap from Face of Evil, is it?
Yeah, he was also... I can't look at him without thinking of my childhood, because he was in an episode of Chucklevision. That I have on a tape, on a VHS tape, recorded from the time it aired, complete with all of the hilarious continuity from the 90s. So I can't look at him and not think of my childhood. But
was that also directed by Pennant Roberts, like this, and Face of Evil?
That'd be amusing, wouldn't it? Pennant Roberts does Chucklevision. But it'd be funny, actually. It's a type of stupid thing that would happen, wouldn't it? But Raker, really on the nose, horrible guy. Obviously gets his comeuppance, as all people do. But it's what I think is interesting about Blake Seven is it's actually slowly unfolds. When you look at it for all the things that we know about the series, like for example Servalan, after these 2 episodes, and I can confirm the 3rd episode, still haven't seen Servalan.
Wow.
And that's a huge part of the show which hasn't been revealed to us yet, which I think is quite interesting.
Well, Travis as well was a big...
Travis again, not in it at all here. And so that fascinates me, that the show's got enough to go on that it doesn't need to reveal these huge things just yet.
What about the effects?
I think the effects, I mean, we were saying, weren't we, that the... certainly in the first episode, the ship stuff and all the not CG, the elements like the space stuff is not quite as effective as it is later on.
Yes, I mean it's strange that they use bits from the animation, the cell artwork animation that's done for the opening sequence. They use that in the program, and so you have these bits of the ship going along where it's blatantly a piece of artwork being animated, and that just seems a bit ropey. I thought the shots of the London were good, and I quite liked in the first episode the sort of matte thing they did of the huge domed city.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, those bits are great, and you know, as soon as you move on from that into the other episodes, the model effects are incredible. I think. Like that prison ship looks brilliant.
It does, yeah. But there's a bit with it, the Liberator always had a tendency to wobble a bit, didn't it? I think it's quite an unwieldy model.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's very much got that sort of BBC quality to it, hasn't it?
And talking of the inversion of Star Trek earlier, the Liberator is kind of a bit like an inverted Enterprise, isn't it? Because the pods that sort of stick out behind the nacelles that stick out behind on the Enterprise are like sticking forward on this, and it goes forward, doesn't it? It's kind of, you know what I mean? It's like they took that as their design cue. I don't know whether anyone's ever said that. It is in many ways nothing like the Starship Enterprise, but it's more like the Starship Enterprise than it is any other ship in Blake's 7, or you know what I mean?
Well, I think as well that, you know, a lot of the technology that they've kind of gone for is pure Star Trek, but they've tried to invent little elements of it to make it less so. For example, they have, you know, the teleportation elements in this. For example, you have to wear a bracelet in order to be teleported down.
Yes.
The guns, for example. Yeah, you know, with great fun effects. That one. You know, can you imagine the person whose job it was that had to trace the characters every time they came down? Thinking, another bloody thing you've got to do. But also, like,
they had
guns,
an outline,
you know,
around them, didn't they? That
yeah.
Sort of, just to explain for any listeners who haven't watched Blake's 7.
But the guns as well, like the guns are plugged into the belts, and they also, you can't hold more than one gun at a time. The guns have a weird
the plugged into the belts
harmonisation.
thing, that's very much a Terry Nation thing.
Yeah.
If you think at Planet of the Daleks, Doctor Who, 1973, their guns are plugged into their belt. And also in the script for the pilot Dalek series episode, he describes in great detail about how people's guns are plugged into belts. And I think it's this old-fashioned idea that if your gun works as an energy weapon, well, where does it get the energy from? It can't fit in the gun because batteries are enormous. So maybe the batteries on the belt. That's the idea, isn't it?
But I mean, having said that, I could, if you said to me, if you said this is an energy weapon, but it uses such a vast amount of energy that we have to have a power unit on the belt, I'd probably just believe it. Even now, I'd be like, yeah, fair enough. Huge amount. Well, it's got to have enough energy to kill someone. Yeah, it probably has. Just is going to need that, you know. I like it. I like the idea that things plug into stuff. Not enough things plugged in. We've all got
just general in life.
Just in life, yeah. You know, mobile phones. Let's just plug them into our belts. Perfect. For no reason other than it would be fun. Well, big curly wires like this. You can hear it there.
I remember at the time of the invention of the first mobile phones, there was a rubbish joke going around that a lot of comedians told, where this person has this minute phone. It does all these incredible things. And the guy said, that's incredible, because phones were big bricks in those days. He says, absolutely, yeah, it's just, well, he said, yeah, I think I'll buy that. Okay. And he said, oh, and here you are. And he hands him 2 enormous cases, really heavy. He said, what's that? That's the battery.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much what phones were, though, wasn't it? They're huge things. You have to lug them around. And again, now trends in technology, like the new trend is that phones have got really big now, so phones are going to get small again, is what they're saying. And I was read that the other day. Yeah, because phones
be on the end of your finger.
Yeah, like in years and years. But the technology in Blake 7, I think they nail it and try to ground it down to some extent. Obviously, the Liberator goes without any real basis, because of course the Liberator itself is meant to be the most advanced ship they've ever seen.
Well, it's from some bizarre technology. And do we ever find out who invented the Liberator?
I can't remember, so I'll say no.
And what is all the business of that weird thing that makes the Federation guys who go on board? They kill themselves, don't they? They get some mental assault. Some weird thing comes on the Liberator screen.
Yeah.
And why doesn't that work anyway? Why does that stop working?
Don't they shoot the... They shoot the orb.
Do they?
Do you remember there's they're like because they go in there and they see their brother or something. Somebody sees their relative, and then they're like, "Look, it's so and so." And
that's Avon sees his relative.
Yeah, and then Jenna, I think as well sees something, and I think Blake shoots it or something like that.
Yeah,
that's what they do, and then it's all fine.
I suppose Villa would have seen an enormous, something to steal.
Yeah,
an enormous pocket,
a huge jewel.
Yes. Now talking of the characters, do you have so far? We haven't got to Callie yet. Do you have a favourite character of the lead so far?
My favourite has always been Avon. Of course it is, right. Because Avon is just, there's something so, every single line uttered from Avon's mouth is a joy to listen to. He is just a fantastically written character, and fantastically performed by Paul Darrow as well. Paul Darrow with an incredible voice, and he gets it, and he just has that, he's above everything, and it's just, what a cool character.
It's true star quality, isn't it? Because that character could be quite irritating, always sort of moaning and being negative, but he just makes him, the way he sort of stares into the mid-distance, you're drawn into him, and that fascinating voice he has, And people say he got very over the top later, but it's quite a big performance right from the word go, and but he totally believes it, so you believe it too. Yeah, it is a brilliant performance. Definitely,
and it's I think you hit the nail on the head there. Really, had it been played by somebody else, I think you could be right. It could be pretty awful actually, but I'm a big fan of Paul Darrow's voice. I had a great thing a couple of years ago. There's a computer game, a virtual reality game called Elite Dangerous, and it's like you fly a spaceship in virtual reality. Well, I got a modification on the computer so that I could control aspects of the spaceship with my voice. And they do this, it's like made by a third-party company, and they get famous actors in to play the ship's computers. And they all have their own unique characters based, but it's really, so they've got Paul Darrow's in there playing a computer in a very serious, a very similar vein to his character. And you've also got Tom Baker as well, and
really?
Who else? And I think both Hollies from Red Dwarf. And so I got a great thing where I'd sit there and say, "Computer, could you turn thrusters up to full?" And you'd have Paul Darrow there going, "Well, I suppose I better turn thrusters up to full, mustn't I?" There we go. Really, really good, really good.
Let me just check something. Steph, it's not time yet, is it? Do you see her come wandering in? My wife came wandering in.
Oh, did she? I had the I had the browser open. Oh, came like a Tommy Cooper thing.
Yeah, just wandered in. It's time to go and pick up our son from his staying away on a farm trip he's going on. I just want to say before we have to go that I've got a soft spot for Gan.
Gan's great. Yeah.
I love Gan, and it's a shame he died, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely is. But Gan's a
strong,
great character, huge bloke as well.
Yeah,
the real muscle of the gang. Have you noticed as well? His voice sounds quite a bit like Matt Berry. Like everything he says is very sort of. I can't do Matt Berry, but it's all sort of.
Mind the gap.
Mind the gap. Yeah. Fire the nuclear weapon. I can't do his voice at all. I don't know who that was. But yeah, no, he is.
To practice. Have to get Alex Mallinson, ex of Big Finish. He's very good at doing Matt Berry. Anyway, I digress massively. We haven't had time for Jamie Anderson because I have to zip off now. That was Blake 7. I think I'm giving it 4 exclamation marks. I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to, and I thoroughly recommend that people watch Blake 7 again or for the first time.
Yeah, I'll give it a solid 4. Loved it to bits. 5 warrants the level of all-time favourites for me, but a 4 I think it's an absolutely stellar bit of work. Great cast, pretty rocking effects, and a good story as well, and music by old dudders.
Jolly well done for the resources available at the time, he said patronisingly.
Yeah,
now, if you want to write into the podcast, please send your email to podcast@nicholasbriggs.com. There you are. Next time we'll be reading out some of your emails. They've been stacking up, but we could do with some more. We can always do with more. It's nice to read through and see what you have to say. What we're going to do next time, I think, we'll be at episode 3 of Revenge of the Cybermen, Doctor Who 1975, Tom Baker, Ian Marter, Elizabeth Sladen, and also Kelman.
Oh, Kelman.
I can't remember that. Jeremy Wilkins, is that the actor's name?
Oh, that's asking a question. I can find out for you right now. Yes, Jeremy Wilkin.
There we are. Yes, we'll be back doing a commentary of episode 3 of Revenge of the Cybermen, plus reading out your emails. Thank you very much.
How exciting.
Time to get close to the microphone.
Yes, well, here we are.
Goodbye.
Nice and cosy. It's goodbye.
Pressing stop now. It's ka-chunk.